You get back to town and make up a coroner's report. Just put down Jack Flynn as the name and the cause of death.
It was a spider. Drained all the liquid out of his body.
Just put down cause unknown and let the coroner worry about the rest. That's the trouble with you eggheads. You jump to conclusions. I know what I see, and I see a dead man, but I don't see any spider.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Critically Acclaimed, the podcast where highbrow and lowbrow collide. My name is Bibbiani. I'm a critic. Everybody calls me Bibbs.
I'm a critic. Just to confirm that.
Well, I'm not a critic for anywhere in particular right now.
No, we're both sort of free fluting.
Yeah.
I am Witney Seibold. I too am a critic. I sometimes appear in public criticizing movies,
and sometimes you appear in public just getting your groceries.
Yeah, and then they put a big butterfly net over me and drag me back in.
I don't know about you, audience. I don't know where you're listening to this. I don't know where you're listening to this, but for us, it's 3 a.m.
And we're deep inside the lower intestine of a sperm whale, and we don't want to explain the scenario.
Yeah, suffice it to say, when they tell you don't, swim right after eating, this is why. You're going to get eaten by a sperm whale and have to do podcasts. No, it's actually 3 a.m. right now. So if we're a little loopy, that's the reason why. This
is going to be the loopy episode.
Ooh.
Because we are sleep deprived. And that's when we're the most fun.
I hope.
We're going to devote ourselves to just crap films, and we're going to have to explain ourselves for years. The Adventures of Pluto Nash is pretty good.
Ooh, God, how tired are you? Yeah, so this is going to be a hell of an episode. It's the first episode of a new year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well, and to everyone at home in Schmoland. So that means a couple of things. One, the movies mostly suck.
Yeah, it is the first weekend in January, and as we all know, that is the best time for cinema.
Sure.
The studios have exhausted all of their Oscar-worthy contenders at the end of the year. They have nothing to prove until school gets out. So yeah, from January until around March is a pretty bleak, alkali, flat wasteland.
I think February is starting because there's a lot of holiday weekends in February. There's a Valentine's Day weekend where people want to go out. February, we're starting to get some blockbustery kind of movies. But the first weekend in January, they do not want to release a great movie. Because if it's a great movie, they're not eligible for Oscars for another year. So what's the point? They've already released a bunch of, they hope, every studio, great movies, but a lot of them...
And those are still playing, so the theaters aren't wastelands, but for us critics who have to cover the new movie beat...
And the other thing is that a lot of those movies were limited releases that are only expanding over the course of January. Hopefully, at least the plan is, as the Oscar nominations are announced, so they can capitalize on the free publicity. So there's a lot of people all throughout America, all throughout the country, all throughout the world that are only just getting films like... I'm trying to think of what's even
expanding. I think The Post is expanding.
The Post is expanding right now. That's a major release, but we've already reviewed that. All that is left for us is Insidious: The Last Key, which joins a very, very disreputable lot of horror movies that opened the first week of January in the last 5-10 years or so.
Usually, for a while there, it was all satanic possessions. I think 3 or 4 years in a row, the January horror film. There was The Rite with Anthony Hopkins. That was a January release.
But I'm thinking specifically the first weekend.
Oh, okay.
The first weekend of January, not great. We had The Woman in Black 2, Angel of Death.
There was a Woman in Black 1? Yeah, it's don't remember either of those.
There was, what do we have here?
The Devil Inside.
The Devil Inside, which is a movie so lame it ends on a cliffhanger that sends you to the promotional website.
We couldn't write it, so go to the website. We'll figure something out.
I'm surprised we still haven't had a sequel to that. That movie made so much money. You'd think you could just whip out a couple of free sequels to that. But we had Texas Chainsaw 3D, a movie most people reviled. You and I thought it had its entertaining bits, but it's dumb.
It's a decent entertaining
I think last year we had Underworld Blood Wars.
We had Underworld Blood Wars, and I think the following week we had Resident Evil the final chapter?
It was the final chapter, supposedly.
Yeah.
Because
when a horror film calls itself the final chapter, it always is. Friday the 13th, I think, did it 3 times. They had 3 final chapters.
They had the final chapter. They had Jason Goes to Hell, which is about as final as it gets.
The final Friday, and I guess there hasn't been a final one since then.
Well, you're all downhill once you go to Manhattan.
Well, someone say to space, but all right.
I interviewed Kermit the Frog once, and it was one of the happiest moments of my life.
I got to too.
He was really nice, wasn't he?
He's a delightful. I was about to say human being, but he's not.
But I asked him because I interviewed him for Muppets Most Wanted, and the first rebooted the Muppets movie that Disney put out was very much in the vein of the first Muppet movie, and then the second one was very much in the vein of the second movie. It was another Muppet caper, and then I said, "Well, what's next? Are you going to take Manhattan back from Jason Voorhees?" And Kermit's like, "Oh, he can have it."
I got to ask him a question, and I could see he was a little taken aback. He had never been asked this before, and I was very proud of myself. Said, in Muppets Most Wanted, you play Kermit the Frog. How much of that Kermit is you, and how much is a fictional extrapolation of who you are?
Ooh.
Because he's playing a character named Kermit the Frog, but clearly he's here doing press for a film he made.
Yeah.
How real is that Kermit? And he said that guy's pretty much me, but there's parts of that's not really me.
Yeah.
And my mind exploded.
Didn't have a canned joke response to that, so you had to actually answer the question. Well done. Well done.
But yeah.
That's how you interview Kermit the Frog.
But back to our reviews. We're going to be doing Insidious: The Last Key.
We're going to be reviewing a film that was supposed to come out 3 years ago that only just came out on Netflix called Before I Wake. And then you got a couple indies you want to review as well.
I saw them, so I may as well review them. I saw a film called Blame, a high school drama, and I saw a film called The Strange Ones, which has a lot of mysteries, so I won't be able to talk about too much of it.
And then we're also going to be reviewing the allegedly bad movie
that you chose.
Yeah, you choose every week. You choose a bad movie for us to review on the Schmoville Facebook page. And then we pair it with a good movie to sort of bring out the best and worst in each other and sort of bridge that gap between highbrow and lowbrow.
I'm a big fan of the sublime and the ridiculous, sort of back to back.
Often they're the same thing, I find, but we'll discuss that maybe in a little bit. But let's just get this started. So obviously the big release this weekend, and the one we actually both saw together, is Insidious: The Last Key. It's the 4th film in the Insidious franchise. It's the 2nd prequel in a row.
Follows chronologically the events of Insidious Chapter 3. This is the first one that does not have the word chapter in the title. The first sequel that doesn't have chapter in the title.
So I guess it's an anecdote?
Well, it's a key, which is a literary device. Oh. So this is going to be the thing we need to cite when referring to the other films.
This is the glossary.
Yeah. This is the gloss. It's just a list of crap.
Now, my overall opinion on the Insidious movies is I generally like them, but for the most part, I find them pretty derivative. The first Insidious is a pretty okay riff on Poltergeist. There's a lot of structural similarities, a lot of character similarities. Elise is very much
the Zelda Rubinstein character.
Yeah, Lindsay and Zelda Rubinstein probably went to school together. I feel probably is where that sort of overlap lies. But it's certainly entertaining, but I think it relies a little too much on just loud noises. For my taste, I find that a little
that's been the whole series. The first 2 were kind of wacky and strange. The third one was a little bit more restrained. That was the one that Leigh Whannell directed himself.
Yeah, Leigh Whannell wrote every episode in the franchise. He co-stars as the ghost hunter Specs, the nerdy one. And he directed the 3rd installment, which was a prequel about how Elise, the psychic Ghostbuster, met her comedy sidekick Specs and Tucker.
I need comedy sidekicks. You guys will do.
I like the second one best, actually, because the second one, it kind of just flies off the handle. There doesn't seem to be as many rules. It kind of plays off of this huge cliffhanger we had in the first one where someone got possessed and someone died, but then it doesn't track the way you normally would from there, and it becomes this weird psychotic family drama.
And there's this weird time travel stuff that's going on. People are skipping around, using magical boogeyman closets and stuff. Yeah, it's just bonkers.
It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it's a hell of a thing to watch, and it's very very entertaining, and it feels like its own thing. Whereas the first one again felt like Poltergeist, and the third one felt like like they're kind of trying to do the first Insidious, but without maybe breaking the mold so much, and kind of just doing an episode of the Elise, Specs, and Tucker TV show.
It feels like many other horror films I've seen. It's like the most nondescript in the series.
It's not bad. It's just sort of
And now we have one that is equally nondescript, I would say. Insidious: The Last Key is essentially the Elise origin story, where we get to see the Lin Shaye character's youth as she was growing up in a, big surprise, a haunted house. She had her psychic gifts when she was a young girl, and her father abused her as a result. And
he didn't understand her, so he tried to beat the psychic powers out of her. Basically, we find out there's more to it than that, but
and those
that's the setup.
Those scenes are all told in flashback, and we get to see how she's called back by the current resident of that house to go investigate the haunting afresh.
No, I really like that setup, because there's this thing that happens when you have...
it's a great idea.
When you have a show or a movie or a series about ghost hunters, like Supernatural or Ghostbusters or anything, really. One of the things is that they're always kind of stepping into someone else's drama. They're not necessarily connected. The first two Insidious movies, Elise, Specs, and Tucker are stealing the show, but it's not really their story. Here, they're going into someone else's house, but they have the deeper emotional connection to it. And that's a good idea, especially when you have a prequel where everything seems a little, we know who survives and who probably doesn't. But here there's a bit more of a charge to it. But it actually does have a lot of problems. This movie feels very sloppy in a lot of ways. There's a whole bunch of... There's a whole first act feels kind of...
Yeah, they conclude, essentially, the mystery, and then we introduce new characters, so... It's kind of like in Jason 6, Jason Lives, the bad one.
Oh, fuck you, I like that movie.
Those movies are all pretty terrible, actually.
6 is the one where they say, screw it, we're going supernatural. Can you imagine?
No, it's lightning. It's science. Yeah, but he's Frankenstein.
Okay, my point is that that's the one where they bid adieu to anything even remotely resembling reality and say, screw it, everything is insane and magically science.
What I was going to refer to, though, is in that movie, Jason murders every single character that we're introduced to, so they have to hastily introduce all new characters halfway through the movie so he can continue the killing.
See, I think that's fun. That's different.
Well, it's fun just because you can tell that they're straining to keep the exploitation elements alive in a movie like that. And in Insidious: The Last Key, we've wrapped everything up. You can tell the writers kind of wrote themselves into a corner, so they have to introduce a bunch of new characters kind of out of the blue. They just go into a diner and there's new characters there.
And by the way, they're
they're Elise's relatives.
Which is, this one feels really sloppy. Even if you look at like the first act of this movie, like a whole bunch of scenes don't actually flow into each other, and they keep cutting to the outside of Elise's house with a bit of ADR explaining why everyone's clothes are different. Like it really feels like they kind of chopped this sucker together out of reshoots and twine. It's pretty amazing.
It's not as egregious as I've seen in even some like bigger Hollywood movies, but it's a low budget horror film and it feels like it.
I don't know. It just frustrates me because like Specs and Elise and Tucker are such fun characters that you kind of just want to see them hang out. Even in the last one, they only met in like the second half, and then they were all business. Here it's like, whoa, what are they like? Oh, it turns out they're roommates. Oh, that's kind of funny. What do they do? Tucker messed up her chandelier.
Yeah,
these are the jokes.
He's not a very good engineer. He tries to attach lights to things and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
He's a lech.
They're both leches.
Well, I guess they're both leches.
Yeah, that's boy, is that fun. Yeah.
So there's a lot of really awkward flirting with much younger women, and here's what I like. The atmosphere is fine. You've seen these Insidious movies before. You've seen the Conjuring movies. They all have a very similar tone. These haunting movies that are all really big right now. Sinister is slightly different, but for the most part,
first Sinister was pretty great.
Yeah. Sinister 2, not so much.
I still haven't seen it. I hear it's terrible.
I had to remind myself that I had seen it. Like, wait, I have seen Sinister 2. So if you like that tone, it's here again. Works fine enough.
There's at least one jump scare I hadn't seen before and was pretty great. There's a whole sequence built around Elise kind of looking at things. I'm not going to ruin it for you by describing it more than that. But suffice it to say, did not go where I was expecting, and I actually did jump and I kind of embarrassed myself amongst some other critics.
I jumped a couple times. I was sitting next to another critic who did scream once, so nice. that was really fun. I like the monster. I think it's eventually revealed that there is like a central demon that's been sort of in and out of this house, and indeed it's like a demon that's been responsible for like ushering in other demons throughout the series. So it's kind of like it's kind of like a boss monster in a video game.
They're revealing something that they think is super important about the mythology that answers a question literally no one had.
But it's this big, lanky, like 9-foot tall thing with keys on the ends of its fingers, and it's kind of cool looking. Actually,
the keys on the end of the finger, and we're talking like old, tiny keys, with just like long, thin metal and like a couple of prongs and.
Not like the one you used to open your apartment. It's,
like keys with character. And more character than a lot of the characters in this movie. But, that's a cool little monster. There are things I like about it. This movie is not a complete wash. And certainly, you got to appreciate any horror movie, any horror franchise, which is all an excuse to show why I think Lin Shaye's like 74 years old. She's the protagonist of a horror movie, and it's all about how she's a fucking badass. And Lin Shaye deserves it. She's been a great actor for a long time. She gets a whole fucking franchise to herself. She owns it. She really is a great, dynamic, exciting, charismatic presence. That is awesome. I wish the movie were a little better, but I feel like what we're kind of doing with this is we're kind of spinning our wheels in Insidious, because Insidious Chapter 2 ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, and they did a prequel rather than resolve that cliffhanger, and then they're doing another prequel rather than resolve that cliffhanger,
and the prequel leads right into the events of the first Insidious, so we've closed the loop at this point.
Yeah, they either have to end it or they have to move on. I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, well, this is the last Insidious. I see absolutely no reason why that's true. And in fact, I don't want to I feel like there's a couple of things that aren't worth spoiling if you want to see it. I know the franchise has fans. They introduce one element. I'm not going to tell you if it's a plot point or a character or whatever, but one element that kind of, for me, I think only exists so that they can use it in Insidious Chapter 4 or whatever it is.
Chapter 5.
We
just saw Chapter 4.
This is not a chapter.
Oh,
this is the glossary. This is there's one new element that they think they only have so they can call it in when they finally resolve the Chapter 2 cliffhanger. It's like, there's this thing going on and Elise is a ghost. What do we do? Oh, we'll do this. We'll bring in this, and like this person, this plot point, and they'll be like, "Oh, okay, great. Now we have a franchise again." And I think that's the only reason this movie exists, is to introduce a new wrinkle. I kind of don't think you needed to do it. I think you could have just done it anyway. But I feel like they're trying to be organic.
I understand this is not a very good standard to which to hold a feature film, but given the kind of crap that typically comes out in January, it's kind of a relief to find one that's merely efficient. Because that's actually not it's not good or anything, but it was not painful.
No.
I wasn't scratching my face off like in other January releases, like Frankenstein or the Nut Job or something.
I think Frankenstein was February, actually.
No, it was a January release.
Was it? Oh, Jesus. Fucking Frankenstein. One of the worst damn things we've ever reviewed.
We did a whole commentary track for that damn movie.
That was death.
Yeah, you can find that online somewhere, I'm
God
sure.
Help you. That was brutal is what that was. But, yeah, no, you're right. This is for first weekend in January horror movie. This is okay.
It's okay.
It's not great. Certainly, it's the low point, I think, of the Insidious franchise, but it's a watchable matinee horror movie. It just feels just really haphazard. Like, here's something that just sort of feels like they just sort of built something up and then just let it sit there. Elisa's house is a haunted house, and one of the things it's haunted by is it's next door, literally next door, like on the same plot of land as a prison, and her dad
was an executioner.
Is like an executioner or like a guard at this max security prison where they execute people. And we never go inside the prison.
We don't even see the exterior of the prison. It's just this abstract thing.
It's some building. It could be any building. Like, why set that up? It feels like there was a more expensive draft and they had to cut it out. Like, it just... Anyway. So, Insidious Last Key. Tell me about one of the movies you reviewed. Tell me about The Strange Ones.
The Strange One. This is the one I'm going to have trouble talking about just because it's all geared around a mystery. It's based on a short film, and you can kind of tell because not a lot happens in this feature. A young boy is probably around 13 years old, maybe 14, is on the road with an older man in his 20s, played by Alex Pettyfer. This boy is either on the spectrum or he's maybe is just a little bit insane. We're not really sure what's up with this kid. And throughout their travels, the older man keeps telling him that you don't really need to worry about a lot of things because you can never really tell what's real. And there's a scene early on where he says, "Look at that coffee cup. Is that real?" And the kid says, "Well, yeah, it's right there. I can see it." And he looks again and it's gone. And you're not really sure if there's some sort of insanity here, if there's even something supernatural going on.
I smell a twist.
The twist is...
Just tell me there are twists.
There are twists, of course.
Okay,
they're going to have to reveal who these two people are. They say they're brothers, but they keep referring to separate fathers, so maybe they're half-brothers. And the actual nature of their relationship is left a little vague, and they stay in motels, and they stay out in the woods, and they rely on the kindness of strangers, and they lie constantly and change their stories, and you're wondering what's going on. And of course, it will eventually reveal this. It's incredibly slowly paced, and it does kind of hypnotize you after a while. This strange kind of dark somnambulist insanity that's kind of drifting through your brain, but it goes on a little too long, and it actually, there's a way to hold that tension, and this lets go after a while, and it's just not tense anymore. After a while, it's just sort of dull. The ending is, like, the actual big twist is pretty shocking and kind of irresponsible, and
ooh, that's always fun.
Is not really a good film to be watching in this environment. I'll say that much about it. You can infer what that means. It's great to have kind of a soulful indie this early in the year, but it does, at the end of the day, feel a little bit unsavory.
Okay.
After we record, I'll tell you what the twist is, but I'm sure you can kind of figure it out. Who Alex Pettyfer is, what happened to the boy's father.
Tell me about Blame. Tell me about a different movie.
All right. Blame is a teen drama from... Let me look up the name of the filmmaker.
You can do it.
Her name is Quinn Shepard. She's also the star of the film. She is 22, and this is her first feature film, although she's done a few shorts before. She plays kind of a freaky outsider goth girl at her local high school, and she is taking a writing class with, like, the queen bee of the bitches. And for some reason, there's animosity. It's that old kind of cliched Mean Girls dynamic. They take a class together where they start reading The Crucible, and the goth girl is chosen to be to have the juiciest role. She is chosen over the queen bee to play that role.
The Winona Ryder role.
More or less.
Yeah.
And the queen bee is a little bit miffed at this, and this sort of activates her spite gland, and she goes on a tear on just sort of trying to tear down this girl, and it's trying to bring a lot of passion and actual emotion into things we've seen in usually comedies like Mean Girls and Easy A.
So this one's trying to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really on the nose. They're performing The Crucible. The title is Blame.
Oh, I get it.
The teacher starts to show a little bit more interest in this young girl, which, gets the queen bee a little bit jealous. And we do spend a lot of time, actually, with the queen bee character and how she relates to people and how she relates to boys and sort of the way she wields her attitude and her sexuality in ways that she understands are bad, but she has no really other recourse in her life. That's kind of her only tool. And the examination of that character is what's really interesting. When we get to the actual teen drama of it, it feels really kind of watered down. And again, there's another big twist, also involving a father, that comes up right at the very end. Great. And really puts a button on things. And it's actually a apart from the obvious parts, is actually really well acted and really well put together.
Yeah,
especially
I couldn't quite tell if
from such a young filmmaker.
I couldn't quite tell if you were saying it was good or not. That's a thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm describing the film to you.
Well, I'm just saying, at some point, people do want to know if they should seek it out.
That's what it is, and yeah, it's actually pretty smartly directed. And I hate to use the word immature when I'm describing such a young filmmaker, but it does need a little bit time to sort of percolate on its drama and find a little bit more footing than just the usual teen dynamic that you see in every teenage movie.
That's the thing with a lot of young artists in everything is you're finding your voice, you're also finding what you have to say.
Yeah.
And you can look at a lot of some of the best filmmakers ever, and their earlier work is less mature than their later work. But this has a lot of promise.
It shows a lot of promise.
That's fantastic. That's great.
My biggest beef with it, and it's a beef I have with most films about teenagers going to high school, I never recognized those characters. I went to high school. I didn't have a high school like any of the high schools that you see in the movies. I don't understand these dynamics that people keep falling back on. They must be real, otherwise people wouldn't be writing about them.
Well, I mean, you and I are from Southern California, and a lot of the social structures are different in a big city like Los Angeles, or even like its outskirts like Santa Monica or whatever, than there is in smaller communities where social structures can become a little bit more clearly defined sometimes. So like I remember I was trained for high school by seeing films like The Breakfast Club, and I was like, oh god, I hope I'm not Anthony Michael Hall. And then I get to school and I'm just like, there are no Anthony Michael Halls. Everyone's either like into sports or not into sports, and that's kind of it. Like, it's not really, and there's not a lot of like social classes. We're like, the cheerleaders are on top of the social ladder. No, they're just cheerleading. They were just hanging out. It was that people didn't like each other, but didn't have a lot to do with social structure.
Yeah,
and a lot more to do with what gang you were in.
There wasn't a hierarchy in my high school, is my point, and. It's always frustrated me. It especially frustrated me in high school because I knew the filmmakers were really trying to get me to relate to those characters like as a person. Like, hey, hip young person, surely you can look at one of these archetypes and find yourself. Never found myself. They never reflected my own high school experience. So the constant insistence on relying on these really well-worn archetypes is just... now that I'm an adult, is just increasingly alienating.
I feel like we need new archetypes. This is one of the things that frustrated me, like with Scream 4. Like when Scream came out, it felt pretty realistic. Like it felt like the people were talking like people were talking at the time, and there weren't a lot of really forced, arbitrary social high school class structures that were being manipulated for obvious melodrama. And then when Scream 4 came around, I was kind of looking forward to, I wonder what high schoolers are like now. And it turns out we actually don't know. We're using a lot of the same riffs.
If you want, I saw a really great, it was 2 years ago, I saw a really great high school movie about archetypes I'd never seen before called Dope. And it was about young people of color who are obsessed with the early 90s in the present day.
Yeah.
And how they got away with things because they knew how to manipulate Bitcoin. You know, it was... that's a weird plot thing. But yeah, Dope like finally introduced fresh characters, and I think the filmmaker here needs to learn how to get away from something so well worn and maybe come up with a character on her own, and then maybe she could have like something more interesting to say.
Fair enough. All right, the last film we're going to review, new film anyway, is a film that was supposed to come out like 3 frickin' years ago,
and it was shelved.
Okay, so Mike Flanagan is considered one of the contemporary masters of horror. Certainly he's on the rise. You've probably seen his films like Oculus or Ouija, Origin of Evil, which was surprisingly great considering how bad the original Ouija was.
And I really dug Oculus.
You liked Oculus more than I did, but certainly it's an ambitious and exciting movie. He recently put out Gerald's Game for Netflix, which is a really great adaptation of a Stephen King story. And he's going to be doing like a television series based on Shirley Jackson's The Haunting, and I'm so freaking excited for that.
Series.
I'm curious how they're going to pull it off. That sounds exciting to me. So he's very, very talented, but he wasn't always a name. And back in 2013, 2014, he made a movie that was originally called Somnia. Somnia is the Latin word for dreams. Insomnia literally means no dreams. That's why we call people who can't sleep insomniacs. Boom. He made a supernatural thriller of sorts called Somnia. It got picked up by Relativity. Relativity is the canon group of our times. They made a whole bunch.
Oh, come now! They're not quite that bad.
They're not quite that interesting, perhaps, but
they don't have any ninjas.
You look at the majority of Relativity Media's content; it's mostly crappy genre movies that they had no idea what to do with, or they made really weird choices about. Before I Wake is one of their more notorious, I guess, failings, because they'd never released it. They kept pushing it back. It's supposed to come out in early 2015, and then mid 2015, and then late 2015, and then early 2016, and then mid 2016.
So they just kept pushing it back? They didn't shelve it?
They didn't shelve it. They kept moving the release date, and then finally Relativity went bankrupt. And this is one of the films that just slipped through the cracks. And it finally got released this weekend on Netflix. It actually got released overseas, so some people have seen it.
Okay.
But in America, this is brand frickin' new. And it's interesting because you can see how old it is in like little tiny ways. Like there's a bit where Thomas Jane, it's about Thomas Jane and, oh god, what's her name? I always forget her name. Kate Bosworth.
Oh, okay.
Thomas Jane and Kate Bosworth are a married couple. They had a small child. That child died accidentally, but it's a huge tragedy, and it's wounded their marriage. But they finally think they're ready to adopt a child. They're going to bring in a foster child. Foster child's played by Jacob Tremblay, who of course is in the movie Room and is a really talented young actor. But there's a scene early on where they bring the kid into the home. And we've all seen this movie in a movie about foster kids or adopted kids, where it's like, and this is your new home. Soon you will befriend a killer whale and it will be really dramatic. But for right now, look at your new room. Isn't it exciting?
Look at your new room. We chose all your stuff when we decorated it. Sorry if you wanted to make that decision.
Well, and actually, to their credit, Before I Wake opens with, they have that scene. They show the kid the room. The room has a bed and a lamp. And they say, we didn't decorate. We want you to be able to decorate.
Oh, good. All right.
I thought that was nicely done. But one of the things Thomas Jane does is he brings the kid in. Hey, do you like to play video games? I got this awesome new thing called a Kinect. And you're just like, oh, Before I Wake.
It's been a couple of years. Come on.
They just discontinued the Kinect. The Kinect is long dead.
So it's a period piece. That's fine.
I know. It's one of those things where you watch it. It's like it's supposed to be brand new, but they're talking about what just happened on the season finale of Lost, and it's just like, oh. Anyway, the gag of the movie is the basic plot is they bring in this kid. This kid has been through a lot of shitty foster families, been through a lot of trauma, and it presents itself in the kid's dreams. Whatever the kid dreams comes real. So
he's the lathe of heaven.
He's basically the lathe of heaven.
Right.
So if you know the lathe of heaven, that's the plot of the lathe of heaven.
There have been 2 TV movies based on the lathe of heaven.
There you go. So they put the kid down to sleep. The kid likes butterflies. He's an amateur lepidopterist. That's butterflies, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Philatelist is stamps.
Philately is stamps.
Okay, there you go. He's a lepidopterist. So, but they have like this beautiful butterfly like infestation in the middle of the night when the kid falls asleep, and then the kid wakes up and the butterflies just vanish.
Okay. So it's only while he's sleeping.
Only while he's sleeping do cool things happen. But what they also see is that because they left up like one picture of their son, the son comes back.
Oh, cool.
So the son is just sort of there, but the kid doesn't know what the kid talked like or what he was like or anything like that. And so after it happens like twice, they put it together and they realize they don't have black mold or a gas leak. They realize that something actually magical is going on. And Kate Bosworth in particular says, I'm going to show him home movies of our kids so he knows what our kids sounded like. And you realize that they're just kind of taking advantage of this kid in order to like fuel their desire to have their son back. back, which actually is a pretty loaded little bit of commentary about people who lose a kid and then adopt someone. You know, it's like getting a new dog.
How much are you replacing the child?
It's like getting a new dog after your dog dies. To some extent, you're just filling, that puzzle piece, in your family. And there's a lot of potential there for something really kind of dark and...
Or at least poignant.
Like, there's a lot of material here. The problem with the movie is that, and it feels like studio notes. It's hard to tell because it just feels like the movie's a little unfocused, and Mike Flanagan is usually a pretty focused filmmaker. It feels like it's trying to be scarier than the story is trying to make it out to be, or that he's making
if the kid suffered nightmares and like monsters were showing up in the house, then sure, that's a great horror movie.
Well, and then there's one monster called the Canker Man, who's like this creepy alien kind of thing. Like, it looks like one of those night terror creatures you see people draw sketches of. This is what I see every time I have a night terror. And it's that stuff. It feels like that stuff is underdeveloped. It feels like when it's trying to be scary, it's trying to be scary in this kind of CGI monster vein, when the real horror is Kate Bosworth. So by like the second half of the movie, where she's like trying to investigate the kid, it kind of rings a little false, because she was really using that kid, and it really doesn't feel like she gets her comeuppance, or she learns enough of a valuable lesson. It doesn't really address the elephants in the room.
There's so much damn potential in that premise.
It's a great premise.
Like, she has to investigate the kid, so she reads him Sherlock Holmes before he goes to bed. And he goes to sleep, and all of a sudden Sherlock Holmes himself is helping her investigate this kid.
That's a cool idea, but that implies one thing they talk about is that the kid can't put anything in his dreams that he doesn't understand, and he's a little kid.
Oh, okay.
So like he couldn't bring Sherlock Holmes to life and be smart. The Sherlock Holmes would be as smart as that kid.
So there's another joke in there. Sherlock Holmes appears. Yes, I will help you. Oh, look, cupcakes. He's distracted by the same things a 6-year-old would be distracted by.
Anyway, listen, it's got a lot of promise, but I hate to say it, I almost kind of sympathize with Relativity, because obviously it's obviously
sympathizing with a studio is not something you should be doing while watching a movie.
It's not that the movie is bad. It's not bad. I don't know. I couldn't tell you how to market that thing. Like, you sell people on it being a horror movie and have them be kind of disappointed when it's kind of more of this weird fantastical realism shtick? Or do you sell them on fantastical realism and not as a horror movie, and risk getting almost no one to the theater because there really isn't a marketplace for that's reliable? There's no target demo of people who just like it when like human drama has a fantasy element and it isn't Disney. And it's actually like really dark and malevolent sometimes.
Unless you have a filmmaker like, say, a Zemeckis or a Spielberg who can do that kind of like sparkle-eyed Muppet drama really well, then you got something. Then you not selling it on more than just the name. You have a tone that people know already.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is like Spielberg would have you look at like Spielberg's films that have that element. Even like Poltergeist is a good example, even though he only like helicopter directed that. Like Tobe Hooper's technically the director, but Spielberg was literally on set every day calling shots.
The more I hear about the production of that movie, the more I understand that Spielberg really kind of directed it.
Or at the very least was a huge influence, much in the same way that like Howard Hawks was an influence on The Thing from Another World. It bears a lot of the stamps of Howard Hawks, even though he didn't technically direct it. But Poltergeist really, really plays super great because it has this sort of magical family drama element, and then they introduce horror. Here, it's like there's a melancholy family drama, and then they introduce fantasy, and then there's a horror element, and then all three elements are kind of fighting each other. It's not like there's one thing and then something kind of infects it. So it's a little bit of a mess. It's not bad, but I can see why they had trouble figuring out how to release it. So what are you going to do? But Mike Flanagan went on to bigger and better things, so it's kind of an interesting little footnote in his career, even though technically should have been one of those biggest breaks. It's kind of funny how it worked out. So those are the new releases. Let's
give them our grades.
Yeah, on our critically acclaimed scale of C- to C+. C- being our lowest grade possible, C+ being our highest grade possible.
I love the cynicism that just reeks off of our rating system. Hollywood movies, never better than a C+.
We're basically just saying no movie will ever quote us.
Yeah. I give it a C+.
Yeah, you're never going to see like on a big billboard in Los Angeles, for your consideration, The Post, C+, says critically acclaimed. We're such dinguses. Real fast. Before I Wake, it's a low C. Like, it's interesting enough that if you're a genre fan, particularly if you like Mike Flanagan, it might be worth checking out, but it doesn't come together terribly well.
I can save us time because this is just a week of C's.
Yeah.
Like, nothing I can get passionate about either way. Like, Insidious: The Last Key is a C.
It's a C. It's sloppy, but it's reasonably entertaining.
Blame is, shows a lot of promise, but, doesn't really live up to all of its potential yet. There's more coming, but so far it's just a C. And The Strange Ones is, such an interesting aesthetic and such an interesting tone that it doesn't quite pull it out as a drama, but, there's enough in it to warrant watching, so it's also a C.
All right. Well, let's move on to our main event, our main attraction, if you will. You had the option to pick a whole bunch of movies for our first week of January, and actually all of your options for this week, for the bad movie we had to review, were mostly older and more obscure films. We find that people on Schmoville tended to gravitate towards like the big obvious name.
The ones that are already pretty well known and talked about a lot.
Which I totally get. They're the films you may have already seen, they're the films you've heard of, they're the films you might get most excited about, but we want to try to branch out, and so we gave you a bunch of relatively obscure ones, like Super Fuzz, an Italian comedy about a superhero cop. Didn't win. Instead, you went for, weirdly enough, Earth versus the Spider.
Yeah, why this one, guys?
Exciting title.
Who's to say? But thanks for choosing it.
I think the outlandish sort of melodrama of like 1950s schlock movie titles, I think it won out. I think it's just the most interesting sounding title.
Earth, an entire planet versus a spider. Well, I'm rooting for Earth in this situation.
Really? You're anti-spider?
No, I'm just, the smart money is on the whole planet versus a bug. Yeah, I think my money is on the planet.
Listen, okay, I'm going to throw it right out there. If this was just any old spider, I'd say yeah.
Okay. But this is the spider.
This is a giant spider. Mm-hmm. This is like a big fuck-off spider.
Yeah.
This spider fills a high school gymnasium. I think you put a high school gymnasium spider against the world, you at least got a fight on your hands. I don't think it's going to be over in the first round.
How many... Look, you could give, 100 people just, ordinary kitchen knives, and they could take down a 20-foot spider.
Would they want to?
You might be suffering some casualties, but that spider is toast. All right? Earth versus the spider? Give me a spider the size of the moon, maybe.
That sounds really cool. Actually, I kind of want to see that movie.
That's a Sci-Fi Channel original movie that's probably already in production, just because I thought of it.
There's a great... okay, so you got to understand that B movies in the 1950s, when we say B movies now, we tend to think of just sort of low-rent movies. B movies literally meant the movie you saw second.
Well,
there was the A movie, which is typically...
The A feature was the star vehicle, the one everyone would go out to see.
Typically had bigger stars, more money, a bit classier, and then it was paired with the B feature, which was usually a little cheaper, a little bit more genre-y, a little bit more schlocky.
And often, the way films were sold back in the day, this was before films were being released nationwide, and a lot of local theaters relied on local product to fill their screens. Theaters stayed open just all day. They played everything on a loop. There weren't posted showtimes necessarily just yet.
For example, you ever wonder why trailers are called trailers even though they play before the movie? It's because if you played it all day, technically they also play after the movie.
They trailed the A feature.
Yeah.
And there was also a newsreel and a cartoon and a B feature. It was a whole day.
Yeah.
It's a party. Sounds great to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, B features... people like, Ed Wood could just go to a theater with a print they made themselves and say, hey,
want to show this?
Yeah, show my movie. It's like, well, yeah, we need something. So really horrible fly-by-night B movies that were shot in Topanga Canyon here in Southern California with some guy in a sheriff costume, a really shitty doo-wop band, and
a cardboard spider.
Some sort of really horrible monster costume.
Yeah.
That's all you needed to make a film.
And then all you did was you lied.
You hustled your way into a theater, and
no, it's not even hustle way into the theater. You get into the theater because they need the product. In order to get people into the theater, you lied. You called it something really cool, like Earth versus the Spider, even though it's a story about a couple of teenagers who find a giant spider.
That's just sort of there, by the way.
Yeah.
The plot of Earth versus the Spider is... Okay, I guess there is sort of a plot. A man is on his way to see his daughter.
For like her birthday.
For her birthday, and he's got a gift. And
it's like the opening of You Can Count on Me. You just introduce a character, give them one little moment so that you give a crap about them, and then they die in a car wreck. The car wreck was caused by a giant spider.
Giant spider. In fact,
other than that, it's exactly like
You see blood splash on his face, which is more than you usually got in 1950s B movies.
Pretty gory for 1958.
And then we meet the daughter. She's Blandy McDaughterson, and she has Blandy McBoyfriendson, and McDaughterson and McBoyfriendson go to investigate, try to find what happened to him.
Yeah, he never came home last night.
So they find the truck, they find the gift. Oh no, maybe he's in that gigantic spider cave. They wander into the spider cave with a big convenient sign that says, "Don't go in. There's a giant spider in there."
They don't actually.
It doesn't really say that.
Yeah.
But
I like to think that sign was put up by the spider so that no one would bother it.
Yeah, and they go in there. There's a giant spider in there, and it's just there. There's no explanation for how it got that big.
It's not a nuclear testing range.
They don't say,
there's not an alien meteorite that landed nearby.
Maybe there were giant creatures this size that used to live under. No explanation. There is simply a giant spider.
No fucks were given.
They leave. They tell the big, soft, pink, oily, bloated cops in this little California township that there's a giant spider.
Hate the cops in this movie.
They are. Like they make the Pillsbury Doughboy look cut. These are just the big doughy white guy is just never something that's been pleasant to look at in these old B movies. And I've seen a lot of these old B movies with these big, unpleasant, doughy white guys.
You understand? He's not supposed to be pleasant. There is this archetype of the small town shitty cop that I think was originally exploited in these sorts of teen-centric early horror movies, because especially ones that were sort of take place in like the Midwest small town community. It's because teenagers were kind of harassed constantly by cops. Basically, we don't trust kids. We want to make sure there are no delinquents.
The post-war wave of like JD rhetoric that was sort of floating out. There's a whole song about it in West Side Story.
Yeah. But basically, kids are punks. We got to make sure kids don't have too much power, too much authority.
So
otherwise, they'll just all become murderers and drug addicts.
And cops and sheriffs are typically bad guys as a result.
So I think what you have
is just killjoys at the very least.
Exactly. So I think what you have is this archetype that permeates through a lot of horror movies. And I think it still persists to this day, even though I think it's less relevant. That's just, we're going to take down that cop. That cop is an idiot. And the cop doesn't know what they're doing.
Here's the problem.
Boom.
The teens are kind of sidelined after that, though, and the cop becomes the main character. The cop and
the scientist
character.
Yeah. What happens is the kids come back to town and say, "Hey, look, there's a giant fuck off spider. What are you going to do?" And the sheriff is just like, "I don't believe you." And then they tell their science teacher, and the science teacher is like, "Maybe there is a giant spider." And he calls the cops, and the cops are like, "Okay, well, shit. I guess we have to investigate now that an adult cares." So they go into the cave. The sheriff sees skeletons and giant spider webs, and the sheriff's just like, "I see no spider. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. There's probably no spider." Sees a giant spider. All right, it's a giant fucking spider. All right, you win. I don't know.
And then another cool gore effect: the spider actually catches a couple people and sucks them dry, and we get to see sucked dry bodies, which is kind of fun. These big creep. Do you remember that creepy rubbery corpse with the swiveling eyes from Life Force?
Oh yeah, it's a great effect. Yeah.
It looked a little bit like, it reminded me at least of the
Life Force. Life Force is the expensive,
Life Force is
awesome version
eight
of it.
steps beyond, but
so they bring in the DDT. That's their thing. They're going to kill the spider with chemicals.
And remember when DDT was super safe.
Oh yeah,
this is 1958. This movie came out.
DDT is this incredibly dangerous toxic chemical that in the 1950s everyone thought was fine. In fact, you can find old newsreel footage of them spraying DDT in communities and children
on kids
and children playing in it like it's a sprinkler. And it's just oh, that's fucking disgusting. That those kids are really sick.
Yeah, they didn't know how dangerous it was until the early 60s. So
when there were some real problems.
For a couple of years, they were just spraying poison on our food and eating it. The 50s were such a great time.
Thanks, 50s. But they shove DDT of this spider's nostrils, and they think they killed it, so they bring it back to the high school gymnasium.
And they just leave it in the high school gymnasium on its back.
Unattended. There's like one dopey janitor who's in charge of making sure kids don't go in there. So the kids convince the janitor to be cool and let them have a sock hop in there with the giant spider. And they immediately, like the power of rock, resurrects the giant spider. It goes on a pretty major killing spree throughout the town.
Yeah.
People running around like maniacs until they finally have to kill this fucking spider.
And to be fair, some of the spider effects are pretty good.
Well,
for a zero budget 1950s B film, there's a lot of like just superimposition and forced perspective and stuff.
Well, we have to talk about the filmmaker,
Mr. B.I.G. himself.
Yeah, so here's the reason why Earth versus the Spider is kind of an interesting film. It isn't because it's a bad movie from the 1950s that was lampooned on Mystery Science Theater 3000. It is those things, and that's a great episode, and you should watch it. The reason it's interesting is because Bert I. Gordon, the director, I think he wrote it as well.
Yeah.
It's based on a story by him, but it was written by a couple other people.
He wrote the short story, of course.
He wrote the story on which the screenplay was based.
He wrote the novella, Earth versus the Spider.
I would love to read that novella. Bert I. Gordon is one of the more interesting genre filmmakers of the era. Everyone talks about Roger Corman, as well they should. He's a very important, influential figure. Bert I. Gordon was kind of the other Roger Corman. He was very prolific.
For every Roger Corman, there were 100 Bert I. Gordons. And Bert I. Gordon's shtick was essentially giants.
Well,
many of his films, and he did
a lot,
about 22 films.
It's quite a few. He did one relatively recently.
Yeah, he's still alive. He's like 92, and he's still kicking out there.
He made a movie like 4 years ago. Yeah. It's nuts. Okay, you say it's giants. But he liked to make a movie about giant stuff.
Giant stuff.
And so small stuff sometimes. Like little shrink. He would shrink people down and like Attack of the Puppet People, or he would blow them all up, like in The Amazing Colossal Man and its sequel, War of the Colossal Beast.
He did King Dinosaur, The Amazing Colossal Man, The Beginning of the End, which was about giant crickets.
Yeah.
I think they were supposed to be locusts, or they were grasshoppers.
They were supposed to be locusts, but they were grasshoppers.
They were grasshoppers.
Yeah.
Earth versus the Spider, The War of the Colossal Beast, which is a sequel to The Amazing Colossal Man.
Yep.
He did
Attack of the Puppet People.
Village of the Giants, which is actually a pretty great movie.
It stars Ron Howard and Beau Bridges.
And Tony Basil's in it.
Is she? I don't remember that at all. That's awesome.
And the theme from it was ripped off by my boss, Quentin Tarantino, as the theme song for Death Proof. The Death Proof music is the Village of the Giants music.
I actually didn't know that. That's funny. Yeah. Okay, but so he
also did a movie called How to Succeed with Sex.
Yeah.
Which I'm guessing is like borderline porn.
Well, you gotta understand that for a long time, the line between A movie and B movie was actually pretty thin. The B movie typically didn't have big stars, but it was made on the same film stock. It was edited the same way. It had about the same amount of money thrown at it sometimes. It was just less prestigious. So if you were a good enough filmmaker or you were a tricky enough filmmaker, you could make a pretty impressive looking movie. Bert I.
They
Gordon,
can't all be William Castle.
They cannot all be William Castle. William Castle had some talent and he had some panache. Bert I. Gordon has no panache. But what Bert I. Gordon did have throughout his whole career is a pretty decent knack for visual effects.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, its visual effects technology surpassed what Bert I. Gordon could do on a low budget. So his work I think his last major thing was Food of the Gods. He did Food of the Gods.
Based on the H.G. Wells story.
And then after that, he just couldn't keep up anymore.
Which is about just giant rats, or is it all a bunch of giant animals? I think
it's giant everything. Just a bunch of giant animals.
Giant animals in general.
It's been a while since I've seen it.
Incidentally, one of the rats from Food of the Gods showed up in the Star Wars cantina scene in the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Okay, if you've ever seen the Star Wars Holiday Special, I'm sorry, that thing sucks. And
it's as bad as you've heard.
Literally as bad as you heard, and you've heard it's the worst thing ever. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life, of any kind. But when they do the Star Wars cantina scene, they need to fill it with aliens. They know they need to fill it with aliens, but they don't have any aliens, they don't have any money, so they just take whatever they can find. And one of the things they found in the backlot was a giant rat from Food of the Gods. So you've got B. Arthur from Golden Girls
singing a farewell song.
Yeah, because the Empire is shutting down the cantina on Tatooine, and she's singing it to a giant rat from Food of the Gods. It's one of the greatest things ever. Holy shit. I digress. You look at a lot of Bert I. Gordon's early stuff, there's a lot of ambition to it. Like, Amazing Colossal Man is a film of major scale.
Just when you're talking about visuals and technicals.
Only. Like, you look at a film he did a film called Tormented, which was also on Mystery Science Theater 3000. It was about a guy.
Between Riff Tracks and MST3K, 9 of his films have been covered.
Because they're not very good. The acting's not very good. The stories are generally kind of crap. But the visual effects are kind of neat. And you look at this film Tormented, which is about a guy who's going to get married to this rich socialite, but it turns out he had an ex-wife or an ex-girlfriend who's going to blackmail him. He ends up killing her.
It's an accident.
It's an accident, but he lets it happen. Like, he could have stopped it, but he didn't. And the guilt torments him. But there's a whole bunch of, like, really cool, for the time, visual effects that are actually relatively impressive.
Like severed heads like appearing under stuff.
Pianos playing themselves. It's pretty good. Or you look at, he did a film, another film was on MST3K, and it's probably his best movie, The Magic Sword, which is a dumb movie about a fantasy prince who wants to save a girl from, is it Basil Rathbone?
I forgot who. Yeah, I think it was Basil.
I think it was Basil Rathbone. He plays a sorcerer, but there's got some cool effects. There's a whole bunch of neat monsters.
The dragon in the Magic Sword is maybe his crowning achievement.
It's a really cool looking practical dragon. You see all of it.
This two-headed thing. It's really great. Yeah.
So Bert I. Gordon had his moments. There were things that he was good at, and when it comes right down to it, he would make a low-budget crap fest like Earth versus the Spider, but he would try to actually have some ambition there. So when they shot in a cave, they tried to really make it seem like a massive cave by using matte effects that most other filmmakers wouldn't have fucking bothered with.
Just too much work.
And you kind of appreciate that he threw some effort into it.
At the same time, however, he didn't put any thought into the way a spider web might look, so he has the kids sit in a rope net that's supposed to be a spider web.
Like, they walk into this cave and there's a huge rope net, and it's just like scattered across the ground, and I have expected to say, like, oh, we found a gang of wandering trapeze artists.
I was about to say, to look up and a trapeze artist will fall on you. Yeah. No, that's the spider's web. Oh, is it? And then it falls into that trap of a lot of old B movies where they just need to fill the time. Yeah. So the two teenagers just get lost in a cave for a bulk of the movie, and they're just sort of wandering around in a cave talking about how they might starve to death.
Just faff about.
And, oh wait, I have a candy bar in my pocket. Oh good, you're saved. You just found a skeleton that starved to death. No, you guys are effed.
The other thing that we have in here...
Oh, good, I found a candy bar.
Earth versus...
The Zagnut will save us.
Earth versus the Spider, a.k.a. just the Spider, a.k.a. Earth versus the Giant Spider. It was originally...
The German title was Spindeln.
Nice. It was originally... I believe it was originally going to be called Earth versus the Spider. And then they changed it to the Spider because the Vincent Price movie, The Fly, had just come out. It was a huge hit. The Fly, the original Fly, by the way, still a great fucking movie.
That is a great movie.
Like, the David Cronenberg film has overshadowed it, and it's certainly a better movie, but the original is pretty fucking solid. Like, it really holds up real well.
Not even camp. That's just a good horror movie.
A really good, tragic, mad scientist movie. But The Fly was a massive hit, so they decided to just call it The Spider, but they never changed the title on the actual movie, so the movie is still sometimes called Earth versus the Spider, and it's a better title, let's just be honest.
But as you pointed out earlier, it is a lie.
Huge lie. It's this small town most versus the Spider.
It's Turlock, California versus the Spider at best.
But one thing, like, you look at a film like The Fly, for example, or kind of even something like, The Amazing Colossal Man, which is about a guy who, okay, you know the plot of the Hulk and how, like, the Hulk was a guy who was, like, working on, like, a new kind of nuclear bomb. It's a gamma bomb, but whatever, and they're going to test it. But then some guy just wanders onto the field, and our hero,
Dr. Bruce Banner, has to rush out there and save him.
But Dr. Bruce Banner gets hit by the bomb, and now he's mutated and becomes a giant monster. That's the plot of The Amazing Colossal Man, and The Amazing Colossal Man came out about 5, 6, 7 years before the Hulk.
And I can guarantee you that Stan Lee saw that movie.
Or at least heard of it, or saw the poster.
No, he went to the theater. He probably brought a date. We're gonna go see this monster movie.
We're not accusing him of anything. It seems like there's a clear inspiration going on here. And then it's mostly this guy is a monster and he hates himself and is really weirdly philosophical, and then he goes on a rampage. But that's a metaphor. That's a metaphor for having a disease and dying and, actually, going through stuff. Earth versus the Spider is one of those films that is just like, oh, fuck subtext. We have nothing.
Look, there are so many monster movies from this time. You look at something like Robot Monster, which I think is like the crown jewel of this genre in many ways.
Why is Robot Monster? Tell them about the monster in Robot Monster.
Roman. Ro-man. It takes place in the distant future where humanity has essentially been wiped out. Roman is left to wipe out like the last family of humans, and he can't bring himself to do it, and he lives in a cave, and he's very self-pitying. And it's ridiculous because he's essentially a gorilla in a diving bell helmet.
Yeah, that's their gimmick. They have a gorilla costume and one of those big diving helmets.
And they put big antenna on it. So yeah, it's a gorilla in a diving helmet. Scooby-Doo would not invent something so stupid as Roman. And Roman is sitting in his cave spying on the humans, saying things like, I wish I could live like them. And the philosophy kind of sneaks in the back. Like, there's this weird kind of pathos to Roman that the filmmaker clearly did not intend because the movie's insanity.
Right.
That's the only way you can get substance out of a movie like that. Accidentally.
Yeah.
You watch something like The Creeping Terror, it's just shit.
Which is why the ones that tend to linger and the ones that actually still are respected to this day tend to be reasonably well thought out. Like, Invasion of the Body Snatchers was a low budget, not particularly
but
like
you can tell thought went into something like
that's
the
why
Body
it's a movie about
Snatchers.
aliens invading and like whatever. But there's subtext. It really plays like a metaphor for the Red Scare and then the whole bunch of other things depending on how you look at it. And it's very well made on top of that. But the reason why it lingers isn't because it's just a neat alien invasion movie. It's the reason because it feels like it means something. Yeah, it feels like it's representative.
Indeed, when you look at a lot of the giant monster films, there's always radiation. Radiation did everything.
9 times out of 10, yeah. Occasionally meteorite. Like
okay,
the Blob. The Blob was a meteorite.
The Blob was a meteorite. Yeah. But that was, we're in the space race, and that was fear of space. There's actually some sort of politic at work.
Yeah.
But there's also this whole breed of, and since Earth versus the Spider doesn't give us even the radiation or meteor or any kind of explanation as to why there's a giant spider, the only thing we can infer from this is spiders are scary. That's the only subtext.
Bert just thought spiders were neat. The most we got, and we kind of, when we quoted the movie at the beginning of the episode, the closest thing we got to a theme is the idea of scientists are so interested in their science that they're going to jeopardize the safety of others. And while the actual sensible small town types just well, let's just kill the spider, who gives a shit? And the scientists are like, no, we should preserve the spider, not realizing the spider is actually alive and going to kill a lot of people. The science teacher in this movie is directly responsible for a lot of deaths, and the movie ends successfully when the scientist basically just says, fuck it, we're not even going to study its corpse, we just got to blow it up. It's this weird kind of anti-science message. I guess it's a message, but it's kind of half-hearted and doesn't really mean anything, and it just feels like we had to sort of give someone something that vaguely felt like an arc.
Yeah.
It's the only character who gets one. That's it.
So,
can we also talk about how in the 1950s, how teenagers in movies and TV shows are rarely played by teenagers? They're usually people at least in their early 20s.
Yeah, or in the case of many films in the 1950s, and even to this day, I've seen 29-year-olds play high schoolers.
Yeah, I get it. Some people look young enough they can pull it off, or at least get away with it.
How old was Shirley Henderson when she played Moaning Myrtle in the Harry Potter movies?
Oh, she was
like 45.
Yeah.
she was an adult.
She just had that great baby doll voice. She could really play it off great. And there was visual effects and everything. Anyway, she was great and she worked it. But there is an actor. I actually don't know who it was because I couldn't pick up the character's name. But there's a character in Earth versus the Spider who's the only person in their class with a car, and there's a recurring subplot where they constantly have to borrow a car off of this guy. He's 50. He looks 50. He's a good-looking 50. He's 50. His grandkids are going to be seeing the movie. I don't fucking buy it at all. The last noteworthy thing about Earth versus the Spider, and it's maybe one of the most shameless things I've ever seen in a movie of this type from this era.
Oh, the movie theater scene where Bert I. Gordon just put posters for his own movies in the movie.
There's a scene in the movie where like one of the protagonists works at a movie theater. Okay, fine, he has a job, and he's like changing the marquee, and he's putting up Attack of the Puppet People, which is a Bert I. Gordon movie. And at first I'm like, okay, it's a cute little gag. I'll let you have it. But then he's like talking to someone who's like, oh yeah, I can't go out. I have to work. We're seeing Attack of the Puppet People. It looks like a really great movie. We should see that, as should you, audience.
What do you think in the audience? That I'm not sure if Bert I. Gordon started that tradition of
this is the earliest I've seen it.
Featuring your own crap in your crap movie, but Charles Band has done that. Oh, yeah. Lloyd Kaufman does it endlessly in the Troma movies. Every Troma movie has ads for at least 4 other Troma movies along the way.
Sure.
There's posters of Troma movies in Troma movies. In like Full Moon Productions, in Andy Sedaris films, like there's posters for the previous films in the series, which makes the continuity feel really strange.
Yeah, there's this weird thing where honestly, for a long time in movies, it seemed kind of gauche to reference the fact that there are other movies. There's an expression, I forget who wrote it, some critic wrote this, where they talked about how Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets was a film about young people who like lived their lives and went out and did things and had experiences and were shaped by their experiences. Meanwhile, Reservoir Dogs was about people who watched Mean Streets.
Right.
As people became more influenced by popular culture became something that the stories couldn't escape, and they literally had to reference if the story was to make any sense. At the time,
and right now we're honing in on Ready Player One, and the snake long since choked to death on its tail.
Like part of me, I watches Ready Player One trailer. I'm just like, oh god, kill me now.
Yeah,
I hope Spielberg does something interesting with it, but my god, it looks pandering as fuck.
Oh god, it makes me want to punch my teeth out. It's just such a terrible looking movie.
Oh god, I hope it's good. We have to see it. Maybe it might be good. I hope it's good. Spielberg makes good movies.
Please don't make me want to kill myself.
But this is the sort of thing. It's just at the time, it's just sort of flagrant. You kind of have to slap him on the back and just say, you know what? Good for you. You make low budget fucking movies for American International, and you just fucking went for it. I almost respect you. Almost.
Well. Thank you, Bert I. Gordon. And thank you, dear audiences, for assigning us a film that was so much about nothing at all that we had so much trouble pairing it with any damn thing at all.
What? Yeah, like
we could have chosen like another spider or bug film.
We almost did Arachnophobia, and that almost would have worked because it's also about kind of a small town. But the small town is actually really well written and full of great characters.
It would essentially be like the good version of Earth versus the Spider.
Yeah,
but that's the same movie. It's just a really skilled version of it.
All we could do is just say this did it better, and that wasn't very interesting. So
providing a counterpoint was very difficult because there's no point.
We kind of wanted to do this great Joe Dante movie called Matinee, which is about sort of the community that the young community and the young culture that sprung up around these kind of movies. But that was really more about William Castle, and we really should just devote another episode to William Castle because he's very much his own entity and he's totally awesome. So you should totally. You should look him up if we don't get to him soon,
or just look up the episode of The Canon that I was on with Amy Nicholson.
There's a podcast called The Canon where they talk about supposedly great movies and they decide once and for all if they should be part of the official cinematic canon. And you proposed The Tingler.
William Castle's The Tingler,
which is one of the most novel horror movies ever produced,
and it may be the best of William Castle's own filmography.
I would probably take the Pepsi challenge and say 13 Ghosts is a slightly better film. The Tingler is a more innovative film, and it's a more exciting film in a lot of ways.
It's also the more notorious of his films. It has maybe the best gimmick of all time. Which is Percepto, which is the vibrating seats.
Yeah.
So I still hold that to be like the best of the William Castle.
I think it's a total argument for it.
We love William Castle so much. I love William Castle so much that we wanted to sort of hold him back for a better occasion.
Hopefully we get to it.
Yeah.
So instead we went for another classic 1950s movies about size changing, and this is sufficiently different from Earth versus the Spider that we feel like it's a different conversation. At the same time, it's exactly how to do this right.
Yeah.
The Incredible Shrinking Man it's got another really wild and woolly title. It sounds very dynamic and exciting. And it's one of the most...
I think this is, however, like this came out in 1957, the year before Earth versus the Spider, and it was back when the word incredible was not used just to denote astonishment. It didn't mean amazing. It meant not credible.
Yeah.
It meant kind of fantastical.
Yeah. It's based on a story by Richard Matheson, whose original novel was called The Shrinking Man. I guess they jazzed it up a bit. And it's a story of a guy who, while on vacation with his wife, he's
out on a yacht.
Yeah, and there's a mysterious cloud. I love the opening credits, Incredible Shrinking Man. It's a cloud, and then like a silhouette of a guy, and the guy keeps getting smaller. It's really dynamic.
Great score. Great piece of music,
amazing.
Too, for this one.
And he just gets doused by this cloud. And the cloud, they don't really talk too much about where it comes from either. It's not really the point.
Well, it's a mysterious thing, and the wife is underneath, is below decks when it passes by. He gets kind of doused, and he gets fabulous. He gets all glittery.
Yeah.
And he's like, what was that? I feel strange. And then he goes back to shore, and I think a few days later walks past some DDT. There's like some sort of pesticide or poison that he's exposed to. The combination of this mysterious cloud and the DDT starts making him shrink.
I don't even think
smaller.
I don't think you needed the DDT. I think the implication is we're being exposed to things. Maybe it's radioactive. Maybe it's chemical. There's stuff out there in the ether that we're just sort of throwing on our bodies, and we have no idea what it is and what it does. And so that's the closest it gets to that kind of commentary.
But the point, I think, what Richard Matheson was trying to do was just a story element. He wanted something He didn't want just one mysterious cloud that he thought that was dumb. So he wanted like something so rare and so unique that it would only ever happen to this one guy.
Yeah, you can't recreate what happened here.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then he notices, like a week later, his clothes don't quite fit. Seems like he's lost a lot of weight. And he goes to his doctor, same doctor who shows up in the Joe Dante movie Inner Space, another movie about shrinking, which is a really great shout out.
Don't think Joe Dante didn't know what the hell he was doing.
He knew exactly what the hell he was doing. Joe Dante was a genius, still is. He finds out he's 2 inches shorter. And that doesn't happen. Not without hunching, at least.
Yeah.
You don't just get shorter.
Well, you do, but like you get 2 inches shorter over the course of a couple decades as you age, and you're 2 inches shorter at 70 than you were at 50, perhaps.
Yeah,
but it doesn't
2 inches
just
shorter
happen
over the course of a month.
Yeah.
It's like that scene in Wolf. That like pretty good Mike Nichols movie about Jack Nicholson becoming a werewolf, and like Jack Nicholson becomes a werewolf, and it changes his whole body, and he gets stronger and more virile, even though he's an older man. And there's a bit where David Hyde Pierce is his assistant, and Jack Nicholson is a book editor, and he's reading a book, and David says, "You're not wearing your glasses." And he's like, "Yeah, no, I got 48 hours of sleep this weekend. I feel better than I've ever felt in my life." David is like, "So now you can read without your glasses?" Yeah. Jack was like, "Oh yeah, I should probably see a doctor." So he goes to see a doctor.
I haven't seen Wolf for a while. I need to rewatch that.
It probably holds up pretty well. It's been a while for me too. But he goes to a doctor, and it's interesting because like there's this whole sequence in The Exorcist that people really revere, and it's maybe the scariest scene in The Exorcist, which is just they don't know what's wrong with the girl. We know in the audience she's possessed by a demon because we've seen the poster, and we know the title is The Exorcist. They don't know, and they're taking it really, really seriously, and they do a whole battery of tests, and they pull out spinal fluid, and it's just really scary.
Like a shunt in her neck at one point. She's squirting blood.
A lot. It's one of the most common anxieties to have an anxiety around going to the hospital. Like it's because you don't know what's wrong with you. It's really scary. And they do that in The Incredible Shrinking Man, and he's drinking barium so they can like look at his chest through an X-ray.
Yeah.
Which is something you did, and it's a really scary thing, and it's probably not a good idea.
They still do it. It's not barium anymore. It's a lot safer now, but yeah,
still something that makes me nervous.
You essentially drink X-rayable dye, more or less.
But they can't figure out what's making him shrink, and he keeps shrinking.
And it's actually, at this point in the movie, though, it's still like it seems like it might be reversible. It's like this weird mystery, and he's not freaking out to such a degree yet that it seems like something horrific.
He's mad at the annoyance, and he's become a bit of like a sideshow. Like he's become kind of famous.
And indeed, up until this point, this is all played for like it's called The Incredible Shrinking Man. You know he's going to shrink. This is it staged like a B movie. It has the word incredible in the title. And at this point, it still seems kind of silly, and I think you're supposed to smile and giggle at all of the shrinking gags. I mean, it's like The Invisible Woman, the sequel to The Invisible Man, where it's all essentially sex gags because there's a nude woman walking around. At that point, it was all just a joke.
There's this bit where he's a couple of inches shorter, he's a couple of inches shorter. You don't need any visual effects to pull it off. And then it cuts to like a little later, and his brother is talking to him, and you only see the back of a chair. And then he cuts to the chair, and he's like the size of like a fifth grader. And he's obviously the actor just sitting in a really big chair. And it's a comical image. But yeah, the drama at this point is he's nervous, but he's mostly just mad at he being inconvenienced and being treated like a circus freak. And in fact, he even goes to a circus and sees little people and
eventually gets a job there.
No, he doesn't really.
I guess he has a romance with the woman who works there.
Sort of. He's married and happily so, but he meets another little person. And in fact, when he meets her, he's actually a couple of inches taller than her. And he gets this sense of normalcy. Oh, other people are this height. This is not the end of the world. I can live, and maybe I can be okay. And then he goes through a bit of a moment, and then he comes back and sees the girl again, and he realizes that she's taller than him.
He's still shrinking.
And he's like, oh shit, because there was a moment where they thought maybe they cured it.
Well, it's not until that moment where he's got back to this equilibrium, we realize that this exploitation movie thing about shrinking is actually not all that dramatic. What can you do? He's just getting smaller.
Yeah.
That's not monstrous. It's actually the opposite of monstrous.
And then the movie
it's kind of anticlimactic. But yeah, as soon as
high gear,
and he has this relationship, he's found some normalcy, and it's when he sees that he's still shrinking, like he feels like he's curtailed his shrinking at that point through a medical process.
Yeah.
And then he sees that he's still shrinking, and that's when he freaks out, and that's when the movie changes into actually something very, very philosophical.
Yeah. And very exciting, visually exciting. We basically cut from that point to him living in a dollhouse, and his wife has to go out for some reason, and she accidentally lets the cat in.
And the cat, of course, is now a gigantic monster.
And so he's fighting off his own cat, which again sounds ludicrous. It's really fucking terrifying, and they use really good visual effects for the era. It mostly holds up.
Well, there's actually a really famous shot of him opening the door, and the door frame is just filled by the cat's face.
Yeah, and it's really, really scary. And like the cat manages to push open the dollhouse because the back of the dollhouse is just bare, so the cat can just come on in and it's clawing at him. It's pretty well done. There's a couple bits of early compositing that are kind of obvious by modern standards, but it functions. And then what happens is I think he cuts himself or something, and then he falls into the hamper in the basement. And now he's trapped in the basement, and he's an inch and a half high.
And he's so small, no one can see him.
No one can hear him, and he's just, that's where he is now.
Now, this
and
is...
because there was that little bit of blood, the wife thinks he's dead.
So, she thinks the cat ate him.
Yeah. And she's horrified, as well you would be.
Now he has to figure out how to clothe him, and it becomes a survival story at that point.
Like Robinson Crusoe in your own basement.
Yeah, more so than Castaway. How does he find food? There's a crumb across 3 feet away, but 3 feet when you're that size.
Yeah. Oh, it's on top of a box too.
Oh,
so
right.
He's got to scale it. He's got to grab a pin and sort of bend it and try to make a makeshift grappling hook.
And guess what's in the basement? Spider.
Yeah, giant fucking spider. Better spider effects. Sorry, Bert.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bert. They had more money for Incredible Shrinking Man.
They had better money. They had better cameras. They could actually film a real spider. They did some compositing. There's one fantastic shot of him and the spider in the same frame.
Yeah.
Where he's plunging the pin into the spider, and it's just as cool as anything from any other big budget fight special effects movie from today.
But what really, really works about it is, there's a sense of a lot of action movies today, everyone, the world around them is kind of rubbery. You ever watch the Fast and the Furious movies, you realize that even though they're shooting at each other or hitting each other at high speed with their cars, nothing bad is going to happen to these characters unless the plot demands it.
Anything and everything.
My theory in those movies is that everyone has plus 100 against cars. There's a scene in I think the 6th one where
was this? How did you know that car would be there?
Yeah. So Vin Diesel throws himself off a tank at like 60 miles an hour to grab Michelle Rodriguez in midair over a cliff, and then they land on top of a car and like crush the car underneath them, and then they walk off like nothing happened. And Michelle Rodriguez says in the next scene, "How did you know there'd be a car there to break our fall?
Cars don't break your fall. Cars break your bones."
It's the most ludicrous thing ever. Here, there's real consequence, not just because he is helpless, he is. Not just because the spider is a giant monster, it is. There's real consequence, but at this point, we really care about this guy, and in a way, the movie almost becomes a proto-version of that movie Gravity, where Sandra Bullock is so screwed that fighting for her survival at all, even though the odds of her surviving are infinitesimal, becomes an act of like superlative, almost philosophical heroism, that life is worth it no matter what. Here he is still shrinking to the point where he might turn into an atom. Like, that's how much he's shrinking. He's still gonna fight, and there's a nobility to that.
Well, he still fights. He has to survive, and as he continues to shrink, even, he's a half an inch tall, he's a quarter inch tall, he's getting smaller and smaller. At one point, he passes out next to a window. When he wakes up, the little tiny space in the screen is now this gigantic cavern. He's that small now. Yeah. And he just looks out in the world, and this is how the movie ends. Mm-hmm. And we have to talk about it because it's such a sublime ending.
It's what makes the movie go from, wow, it's a pretty good movie, to holy shit.
Well, this is like a capital G great film. He looks out and he sees the sky, and at his size, he all of a sudden just essentially sees infinity. He's like looking at the obelisk in 2001. Just the entire vast infiniteness of the universe suddenly opens up to him, and he more or less sees the face of God in that moment as he continues to shrink. And he realizes this is not going to stop. He's going to continue to shrink. He's going to become subatomic. And he reaches this weird Zen moment of peace in that utter moment of despair.
This movie is I mentioned The Amazing Colossal Man. I mentioned David Cronenberg's The Fly. Both of those are films about sort of scientific mumbo jumbo that ends up becoming a metaphor about dying, about having like a horrible disease that is disfiguring or debilitating and degenerative, and you realize that you're dying or that your life is over as you know it. Both of those films, to varying degrees,
they're kind of intimate.
They're intimate, but they're also just bummers. Like, it's basically just like, it's not about achieving greater philosophical awareness or anything like that. It's horror. Incredible Shrinking Man is not a horror movie. It's got horrific elements. That spider's really, really scary, and certainly by the time he's so screwed, there's a certain existential nightmare to it. But what it's about is about, like, okay, I know this is the end of me, but he goes through phases. Like when he's fighting the spider, he's fighting to survive just because there's literally nothing else to worry about. I either live or I don't. And there's a simplicity to that he finds very freeing. And that's an element that can happen when you're dying, when you're slowly dying, when you don't just die all of a sudden. And then there's the moment of acceptance where you realize that death is a part of a cycle, that the idea that things end is sort of a man-made construct, and that we're all just part of this giant organism, and we're kind of all, even though I finally realized it because I'm literally the size of a speck, but really, aren't we all? And there's a certain beautiful philosophical awareness to it that is transcendent. And this is actually one of the best films I've ever seen about dying.
It's about dying, and it's very, very it's very religious. It takes
without being denominational, which I appreciate.
It's not but it does bring up the notion of what God is, and he's looking up, he sees the eye of God, and he actually says, "It doesn't matter how small I get. People will not be able to perceive me. I'm gone to the world, but there's no zero to God." Like,
everything that exists matters. And matters equally if you think about it.
So even though I am nothing, I'm still real. I'm still here, and that's the very basis of existentialism. Yeah. It's the matter of hope, and it was folded in almost unexpectedly into a film called The Incredible Shrinking Man, which is staged as this B film and turns out to be one of the more intelligent, more poignant genre films to come out of the decade.
Well, Richard Matheson, I think a lot of credit goes to Richard Matheson in the story, and we didn't talk a lot about him.
I got to see this on the big screen, followed by an interview with Richard Matheson.
That's awesome.
At the Cinematheque.
I did see this on the big screen once, and it plays like gangbusters, but I didn't see it. Richard Matheson is one of the greatest genre writers of the 20th century. He wrote a lot of horror stories. He wrote a lot of sci-fi stories. He wrote I Am Legend, which is way better than every version that's ever been filmed.
Adapted into 3 films.
Officially into 3 films, unofficially into many, many more. But the Omega Man, obviously I Am Legend with Will Smith. I think the best version of it is actually the Vincent Price one,
version,
The Last Man on Earth. But yeah, the book is better than all of those. Like, it's really fantastic.
Incredible Shrinking Man, Legend of Hell House.
Also adapted into a fantastic horror movie.
What Dreams May Come, mixed bag film.
A lot of ideas. A Stir of Echoes is a really solid movie. He also wrote many of the best episodes of The Twilight Zone, including the classic Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, where we famously got the line, "There's a man on the wing of the plane."
Yeah.
He wrote incredibly clever scary stories, sci-fi stories, but he never half-assed them. They never felt schlocky. They always felt like a work of real intelligence that happened to have schlocky elements that made them really entertaining.
And in many cases, he was a writer for hire. He wasn't like this free auteur who's just sort of cranking. He did write, films on his own locomotion, but The Incredible Shrinking Man was an assignment. Adapt this thing. What can we do with a shrinking man? And he actually tried to come up with the idea, and he just let his mind roam from there. And I think, it goes back to the whole necessity being the mother of invention. He was writing in genres, but he was trying to come up with the actual ideas behind it. And with The Incredible Shrinking Man, he really, really reached deep.
Yeah, and it's fantastic, and you should absolutely see this movie if you haven't already. I know it sounds like we ruined the ending. We haven't ruined the experience. It's a great freaking movie. Earth vs. the Spider is not. Earth vs. the Spider is trash. It's not even particularly good trash. Like it's one of those films
it's
that, like,
forgettable, disposable. It's not even like extraordinarily bad, like something like Robot Monster, where we can talk about something in it. It's just nothing. It's just nothing in there.
It's interesting. Like, I actually we compared him to Corman, and I think Bert I. Gordon maybe in some respects has a better reputation as a director than Corman, simply because he had this sort of visual ambition. Corman had subtext. Not necessarily good subtext, but he had
sometimes.
Look at Teenage Caveman has subtext. It Conquered the World had subtext. He's got some ideas in some of his movies, and especially in his early films when he was hungry and trying to be taken seriously. And Earth vs. the Spider is. You don't need to see Earth vs. the Spider. You do need to see The Incredible Shrinking Man. So that was our double feature for this week. Next week, your poll options. You can go to Schmoville Fanbook. You can go to the Schmoville Facebook fan page right now, and you can vote for the following films. And we'll give you a quick tease about what they are.
Again, our shtick: you choose the bad film, we choose the good feature. Yeah.
All right. So your options this week are: you can vote right now on the Schmoville fan page. Condor Man, which was Disney's kind of their first attempt to do a superhero movie before they had any idea how superhero movies might possibly work.
Well, they worked a lot differently in the 70s than they did now.
Well, this was the early 80s, but anyway. Dirty Dancing, Havana Nights. Hey, remember when there was a sequel to Dirty Dancing? No, you don't. Masterminds, which is basically Die Hard in a prep school with Patrick Stewart as...
in the Alan Rickman role.
Yeah, and Vincent Kartheiser from Mad Men as John McClane. Orca, which is basically Jaws with an orca, except the killer whale somehow finds a way to destroy power plants. It's pretty insane. And this is not a minor thing. This is supposed to be a big fucking deal movie. It has one of the most epic posters you've ever seen.
Because
really cool.
On the poster, the orca is 300 feet long. It's just monster.
And finally, P.S. I Love You. A little bit of counter programming. It stars Hilary Swank as a woman who's trying to get over the death of her, I believe it's her husband, and he left her a whole bunch of notes telling her how to live her life.
And he's Gerard Butler, so it's going to be deep and riveting and textured and subtle.
Possibly Scottish. And that is your
whether or not he plays an American, he plays a Scottish man.
It's funny, you watch, he was in Olympus Has Fallen, which is pretty good. It's a diehard riff, but it's an okay one.
It's no White House Down.
It's no White House Down. I agree with that. But Olympus Has Fallen is entertaining in its own right. And he played like a Secret Service agent who's trying to save the president after the White House gets overtaken by terrorists. Cool. All right. It's a good premise for a movie. The sequel, London Has Fallen, halfway through that movie, he gives up being an American, and he's talking to Scottish people, and you can't tell who's talking. He just gives up completely and goes full Scottish.
Yeah.
It's amazing how little they care.
He let it slip a few times in Olympus Has Fallen, like you could hear his Scottish accent come through, but he's still playing an American.
It's actually pretty hard when you like for an actor not to let their original like accent slip a little bit once.
Some actors are quite good at emulating.
But I've seen a lot of good actors who occasionally just let some. You just threw a little New York in there, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the great pleasures of cinema for me is Ewan McGregor's American Southern accent. Because he has one. It's not from any state. He kind of made it up. And he's used it so many times, and it's just such a delight to hear him crack out that strange Southern accent.
My favorite fake American accent is actually Tim Roth in Reservoir Dogs. I think that's just the America accent. You know how like every American has like some kind of crap British accent, but like if you're actually from Britain, it's just like, well, where are you from? Your accent's all over the place. They have a joke about it, Mrs. Doubtfire. Like I think that's Tim Roth's American accent. He's just a little bit of every part of America. It's just perfect. I love it. I'm not making fun of it. I think it's perfect. Piece
of trivia: the woman Mr. Orange accidentally shot in that movie was Tim Roth's dialect coach.
Yeah, and apparently he hated her so much.
He hated working on the accent. He hated her, and he wanted to be able to shoot and kill her.
Classy
on screen.
All right. Okay. Here's the deal. It is 4:37 in the morning. You need to go soon, but we haven't done letters in a while. We're going to do 3 letters.
3, okay. Hype up some stuff while I get these letters.
All right. Don't forget, you can also check us out on SK Plus on YouTube. That is the YouTube channel. You can't see us do our shtick, but you don't want to. It's 4:37 in the morning, and we feel gross. But so there's that. If you're listening to us on SK Plus, don't forget to check out the Schmoes Know iTunes feed, which has our show and many others as well. You can also listen to us every week on our other podcast, which is all us, not part of the Schmoes Know Network, called Canceled Too Soon, where we review television series that lasted only 1 season or less. This week, we're reviewing the television series Good Christian Bitches, starring Leslie Bibb and Kristen Chenoweth. It is part of a series we're doing all month, in which every episode of Canceled Too Soon is curated by our Patreon subscribers. You can check that out at patreon.com/canceled too soon. Every episode this month is chosen via a poll, and only our Patreon subscribers get to vote.
Here's a letter.
Do it.
This one comes from Juan. Hi, Juan.
Hi.
Hey, guys. Welcome back.
Thank you.
He's a fan. I guess he's a fan of the B-Movies podcast, our old podcast. I'm loving the new setup and the new podcast. I'm really digging all the double features. Arnold was just the worst in Jingle All the Way.
Yes, he was.
I vaguely remember there being an after-credits scene where his wife tells him something along the lines of, "You did so much for the boy, wonder what you got me," and he stares into the camera like, "Oh no, I forgot."
Sequel!
I remember thinking, what a terrible father and husband he was. Anyway, Bibbs, I have a beef with one of the worst movies of 2017 you chose last year.
Let's do it.
Beauty and the Beast.
Okay.
I don't disagree or anything. Well, but you're focusing on the wrong plot hole. You have...
let's do it. What do you got?
Let's pretend that the teleporter that you brought up, she sent off on a horse when he has a teleporter.
Yeah, my argument is the Beast has a teleporter in this new version, but there's a moment later on where she has to get somewhere really fast, and rather than teleporter there, he sends her on a horse just because that's what happened in the last movie.
Let's just pretend that the teleporter actually takes them to the mirror dimension from Doctor Strange.
Yes,
so if Belle used it, no one would be able to see her. Disney owns the mirror dimension, so it's possible. The plot hole I have issue with is this. In the final battle, Stanley Tucci, as a piano, shoots his piano keys, and when he turns back into a human, he is missing his teeth. That means that any injuries sustained would carry over. So Gaston shot the beast like 4 times, right? Shouldn't the beast have turned human and then immediately died from being shot 4 times? Did the Enchantress's curse state you can turn back into a human if you find true love and also survive being shot 4 times, but not 5 because you are not 50 Cent? 50 Cent was shot 9 times and survived, in case you didn't know. You guys are welcome, and I'm glad to have you back. Thank you for the great recommendations. You are the best critics, Juan. Thank you,
well, that's
Juan.
very kind of you. This is actually, you bring up a point which I didn't bring up in regards to the new version because it's in the old version as well. One of the things that I've never understood about Beauty and the Beast, the Disney version. Okay, this is what I do understand. Everything in the Beast's house, especially in the cartoon, is a person.
Yeah.
Every fork, every lamp, everything, every bit of business is another person. At some point in that movie, we see the Beast. The Beast has his own wing. Belle's not allowed in that wing, and we see his bedroom. His bedroom is like torn to shreds. There's paintings that are ripped apart, bedposts that are broke, and I'm like, those were people. And then what's going to happen, because he didn't break that when he was human, so that had to be like after the curse. So what happens is when everyone gets turned back to normal, that room is full of blood and guts and gore. I just want to see that room, and it's just a fucking Tobe Hooper movie.
The joke we always made is I feel sorry for the poor insane soul that got turned into the toilet. That's all.
They didn't have indoor plumbing yet, so it's fine. It was outside the castle. We're good.
Right.
The only thing that makes that work.
Here's a letter from Jacob. Hello.
Bedpans are screwed.
Hello. Remember the curse? You don't know, man. You weren't there. It was the bedpan.
Moving on.
That was the oven. They put roasts in me. I cooked flesh in my body. The trauma these poor people suffered.
Oh my god.
Hello, Bibbs and Whitney.
Hi.
I'm writing with my top 10 list of 2017.
Do it.
But not related to films just released in that time. Throughout 2017, I challenged myself to watch 365 movies I hadn't seen before.
Wow.
A noble endeavor.
Yeah, a lot of people are trying to do that.
I had the time.
Yeah, right.
I started the year watching almost every picture nominated for an Oscar in 2016, and it evolved into delving into the depths of streaming services, and I found a new passion for physical media. Here's my top 10 list of movies I watched just this year. Okay. So this could be anything.
Yeah.
The Big Sick. One of my favorites of 2017. Number 9, Dances with Wolves.
Ah, interesting. I haven't seen that in a long time. I know.
I haven't seen it since theaters. That was 1991.
I haven't seen it since the mid 90s, and it's an impressive production. But I wonder how the subtext plays nowadays.
Number 8, Akira. One of the first movies I watched this year. Akira beat out other animated features like Spirited Away, Your Name, and The Iron Giant.
It's a very challenging motion picture. Like it's overtly entertaining and violent and crass.
It's very, very Japanese.
It's extremely Japanese. Yeah. But like just the way that the story unfolds is it makes you do a lot of work.
Yeah.
If you do the work, it's good.
Number 7, Ex Machina. Very good film.
Yep.
He says, like a modern Kubrick sci-fi movie. I love the performances. Number 6, Get Out.
Yep.
My theater was cursed with people who talked through the entire first act. I called them out on it, and they stayed quiet, but it ruined the experience for me. Nonetheless, the picture blew me away, and I'm looking forward to dissecting it now that I have time to research more movies. Number 5, 8.5. You and I have bad-mouthed 8.5.
We're not big fans.
Yeah. After seeing it on so many directors' criterion lists, I picked it up. The movie makes me want to learn Italian, so I don't have to spend so much time reading the subtitles and spend more time taking in the performances.
Fair enough. We're in the minority on 8.5.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about 8.5 and why you love it, because you and I are in the minority. We're not big fans.
I find it indulgent to the point where I don't particularly care for it.
Like it's a little too specific.
Yeah.
Number 4, The Raid 2.
Fair enough.
I like that's above 8.5. I like the first movie as a simple contained action movie, but the almost Scorsese-esque story of an undercover cop coupled with some of the best martial arts I've ever seen was great. Number 3, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah.
I like the first 2 films in the series more, but this is Leone's masterpiece. I'm not a big fan.
You don't like westerns because you don't like horses.
Just in general.
You don't like horses.
Well, just the whole notion of the man's quest to be more manly is not appealing to me.
Here's the thing. I actually have never seen Once Upon a Time in America. I know a lot of people love that, especially the director's cut. But barring that, I still think Sergio Leone's real masterpiece is Once Upon a Time in the West, which is a bit more unusual and assured. That said, I love the original Man with No Name trilogy. It's fucking fantastic. Actually, Duck You Sucker is underrated.
It's definitely the least of that series, but yeah.
Yeah, I prefer it under its other title, Fistful of Dynamite.
No, Duck You Sucker. Come on. Because it
doesn't tell you anything about it.
What are you talking about? It's called Duck You Sucker. Any film title that's an imperative, I want to go see. Number 2, Seven Samurai. Yes. If you haven't, dear listeners, if you haven't seen it, go see it. See it today.
If you reduce cinema to the prime movies, where all movies stem from these movies, and we have them throughout the history of the medium, Seven Samurai is in like the top 10 movie. There were movies before Seven Samurai and movies after Seven Samurai, and on top of it, it's a really fucking great action movie. Yeah,
great. And his number 1 film is Moonlight.
Yeah.
This is one of maybe 3 movies this year that I absolutely had to rewatch. The cinematography had me spellbound, and as I watched the camera dance around something as mundane as a drug deal or a float on the ocean as a young boy took his first steps into manhood, the actors who played Sharon all inhabited the same character with such grace that the movie had me in tears at the end of each act. A truly perfect movie, in my humble opinion. Moonlight is great.
Pretty damn great.
It's all
was my number 1 movie last year.
It's all recent in our minds, so we don't really have to expand on that.
I guess 2 years ago now.
If anything, this year has taught me 2 things. There are a lot of movies out there, and things like genre, year of release, or country of origin don't define what good movies are. There are great movies in every genre, and I'm excited to keep exploring more. Good for you for doing that.
Yeah.
For allowing yourself to explore in that fashion.
A lot of people like find out what they like, but then they get really comfortable in it, and then they don't need to. You know, like there's a lot of like my taste in music is terrible. I don't study music the way I study cinema, so I tend to like a lot of bubblegum crap. But like. There's other brilliant stuff out there, and I probably should explore more. But that's what I did with cinema, and I think it's made me made my life better. So,
you want one more letter?
We said we do 3,
and this is the 3rd. So this one comes from Hayden, and this is another favorite and least favorite list. And I'll just run through these lists.
Okay.
Since you guys recently released your best and worst list films of 2017, I thought I would tell you mine, except these are my favorite and least favorite. I'll keep it to 5 picks for the sake of length.
Okay.
I only saw 102 releases this year. Oh no, you're so slacking. Only 102? For shame. That's a lot. Come on.
That's by most standards.
New releases? That's pretty good.
For new releases, that's quite good.
Yeah.
That's
for just being a casual observer and not a pro or
anything. There
are
professional film critics who top that at about 100, which is perfectly respectable.
Yeah. I think I was around 150 this year.
I was a little bit more than 150 of new releases. Old releases and TV well beyond. But like
favorite number 5, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Okay.
Number 4, Raw.
Yes. We didn't really talk about 3 Billboards. I think it's controversial for a reason.
Yeah.
I think the performances are excellent, but I think it's thematically very sloppy, and I think it's not always. I don't think it has the convictions it has.
It brings up a lot of troubling things without following through in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I don't think it appreciates how serious and severe some of the topics it just sort of brings up casually are, and it makes it seem a lot less intelligent than it obviously trying to be.
Number 4 is Raw, and the note to that one is screw Get Out.
Okay.
I like Get Out. I also love Raw.
I prefer Get Out, but they're both brilliant.
Number 3, Mother.
Okay.
I love Mother.
Still haven't seen it.
Number 2, Blade Runner 2049.
Yay.
And number 1, The Shape of Water.
We didn't really talk about Shape of Water. I made my runners up. I think Shape of Water is this really beautiful, girl meets monster fable, this hybrid of horror and fairy tale, which Guillermo del Toro likes to do so much, and I think he's really great at it. I mean, we reviewed it when it came out, but it didn't quite make my top 10 just because I feel like Guillermo del Toro is in love with it to the point where he's maybe embracing more of the flaws of the narrative.
Yeah, well,
there's like some really indulgent parts.
The biggest flaw of The Shape of Water, if you want to start going down this path,
and it's great. Just to be clear,
I do like it. I like it a lot.
Great movie. It's just this is why it didn't make our top 10.
Guillermo del Toro loves the monster so much that he doesn't bother letting us love the monster. He assumes that we're just going to love it because it's a monster.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And he does nothing. He doesn't do enough to either humanize or animalize or give character to the creature itself.
It feels like the monster is so representative.
It's like a non-entity almost.
Well, we love it because of what it represents, but the story is so intimate. We needed to get a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
It's like it's a beef. Like I don't think it's a serious one, but it's a beef.
She boinks the monster. It's like that's just bestiality, isn't it? We need to know a little bit more. It's shaped like a person, but how intelligent is this thing? We still don't know at that point.
It feels like the parts of it were a little underdeveloped, but it's still pretty great. It just raises some questions.
5 least favorite. The Circle. Yes.
Yeah, you didn't mention that. I was surprised. You hated that.
I hated The Circle. It was just nothing but wasted potential. Like, great cast, interesting ideas. Dave Eggers worked on it. James Ponsoldt directed, and they all just whizzed it. It's just awful. Number 4, Bright. It's rare that I feel embarrassed for some actors.
I still haven't seen it. Don't have to see it. Might not see it, honestly. I'm just not interested right now.
Number 3, The Mummy. I didn't mind The Mummy when I walked out, and now I just don't think about The Mummy.
Yeah, we left The Mummy feeling kind of like, that wasn't so bad. But then, the more we thought about it, the more we realized they just really whiffed it.
They didn't have any ideas.
There's some good...
Or too many ideas,
There's some good bits in The Mummy. Like, if you watched The Mummy eventually, you'd be like, well, it wasn't that bad. But it's also not worth building a huge franchise around. It's just kind of this lame monster flick.
He says, I will give The Mummy credit because it did impressively destroy an entire cinematic universe in just one film.
It's pretty good.
Number 2, The Emoji Movie. Well, yeah. And number 1, Kong Skull Island.
Really?
This isn't the worst film of 2017, but it is the film that made me mad the most because it is a prime example of a problem with blockbuster filmmaking. It is a blockbuster with generic action, boring characters, and a nothing story. I'm shocked the film got good reviews. I think I might be the only one who passionately hates the film.
I don't know who passionately hates it. I know people who don't approve of it. I finally got around to it. I didn't see it when it was in theaters. I wish I had, because it's got some good spectacle to it. It's a big dumb monster movie. They try to play, they evoke Vietnam War allegories to try to add some melodrama where there is none. But you know what? That's okay. We just saw Earth versus the Spider. There's a long history of kind of meaningless, nothing monster movies, and Kong Skull Island's a pretty good one.
Pretty good. Yeah, pretty good monster movie for being a meaningless one.
I'm gonna say something I've said before recently. I think it's a 4-star, 3-star movie.
No, it's a 3-star.
You think it's a 3-star movie? I think it's a really, really good kind of. Visual effects are fantastic, but otherwise completely unambitious.
I appreciated the reference to Old Boy. They do something similar with the squid. I'll say that
they
much.
Sure do.
Yeah.
that part's fun.
That's our episode. I got to get to bed, you guys.
Dude, it is 4:52 in the morning. Okay, so we'll be back next week with reviews of some new stuff. I'm actually not 100% sure what, but the new releases are Paddington 2, The Commuter, and Proud Mary. So we'll probably review one or more of those. And we'll also review the bad movie you choose in the latest poll. Again, your options are Condor Man, Dirty Dancing Havana Nights, Masterminds, Orca, and P.S. I Love You. And we're going to pair that with a great movie to bring out some of the more interesting qualities of it. That's that. Again, we're on Twitter. I'm at William Bibbiani.
I'm at Witney Seibold. That's Witney with no H and Seibold with an E-I.
Subscribe on iTunes if you haven't already to the Schmoes Know iTunes feed. Check us out on SK Plus on YouTube. And if you haven't already, check out our other podcast, Canceled Too Soon, which is available separately, also on iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever else fine podcasts are sold. That is a wrap, folks. And never forget, everyone's a critic.
I want to go to the midnight show. I'm sorry, what?